Now let's take a moment to reflect on what truly shapes the way a leader shows up, especially when it matters most. Is it experience, perspective, or the ability to stay grounded and intentional in every decision? Our next session, Leading Forward, Timeless Principles for Changing Times, will take a closer look at the qualities and approaches that help leaders stay focused, consistent, and effective in any environment. Please put your hands together for Quincy Hodge, the president of Quincy M Hodge Consulting.
Good morning. Hey, we're in the final stretch here, I think. We're getting close to it. So, I'm an operator, and I'm going to talk to you about two disciplines that I think are, and there are a lot of things that are required of leaders, but there's two disciplines that I've learned in my experience that I believe will help leaders stay grounded, stay ahead of their organizations, and actually stay focused on their mission. So I'm going to, let's see, there we go. Many people call this the era of reinvention. And there's two things here that I think help CEOs stay grounded. Let me make a quick adjustment here to my session here. That way I can keep myself on track here and not cut off any time. Here we go. So the two things I want to talk to you about are called leading ahead and staying focused on the vision. And in this era of reinvention, I'm going to give you a little bit of an explanation of what these two disciplines are. And then I'm going to give you a couple of aviation analogies and what I've learned in my experience that would help you to actually incorporate these in your thinking as a leader and your practices. But first, I want to go back and we're going to talk a little bit about a little history. I'm going to ask you a few questions, then we're going to go back and get some experiences from the past. Who remembers Apollo 13? Okay? And there's some who probably well remember it. Who remembers what happened on Apollo 13? Okay, so it was actually almost 56 years ago in just a few days, April 11th, 1970, we'll celebrate the 56th anniversary of Apollo 11. And of course, the famous words that Hollywood actually said, Houston, we have a problem, were actually spoken by Jack Swigert and Jim Lovell. And they basically said, okay, Houston, we've had a problem. That was what they actually said. But the Hollywood version actually changed the phrase into Houston, we have a problem, to make it a little more memorable. So what happened? Roughly 2 days after their launch, they had an explosion on the service module. And one of their oxygen tanks blew up, and it critically crippled the service module and their ability to actually complete their mission. The mission became a fight for survival. With the lunar landing aborted, the crew used the lunar module as a lifeboat, while NASA and the astronauts worked through severe constraints in order to make sure that the oxygen was not depleted and they didn't have too much carbon dioxide in the cabin as they were traveling back. So the lunar module is pictured on the left there. It only had oxygen capacity for 2 people and for a limited amount of time for a landing on the moon. But what they had to do is they had to take some parts that the astronauts had on hand, and what ended up happening is the engineers back on the ground back in Houston put together with the astronauts on board from things that they had on the vessel. And I want you to notice this little contraption that they created was basically a way of helping them to use the command module's capacity to clean up the air in the cabin that they were breathing so that they would have more oxygen and less carbon dioxide. I'm going to read you a list of the things that they came up with on the capsule that they used plastic garbage bags, duct tape, flight manuals, cardboard, hose from the portable air sampler, a sock, suit hoses and connectors, and then they used Velcro straps and wire ties. And you can see the outline of the tape and everything, and you know, some of the books that they had and the manuals they used as hard backing and everything. And this is the contraption that they created to help the astronauts actually survive. Talk about reinvention. Using things you have only with you that you never planned to use for a very different purpose in order to save lives and get the mission completed and get the astronauts back home. So, this word reinvention, about 8 major consulting houses are using that word to describe this era that we are in right now. And I think maybe we should say, let's see if I'm getting my thing here. Maybe we should say, Houston, we have a problem. We need to reinvent ourselves. So let's talk about this a little bit more. In their November quarterly, McKinsey reported that change is faster, constant, and wearing people out. The traditional change methods are no longer enough. They stated that the leaders now must manage different levels of change, from basic execution to full reinvention. The bottom line, leadership today requires helping organizations adapt continuously without burning people out. If you listen to the conference board or read any of their material, their report in the beginning of the year said, uncertainty is the top concern for U.S. CEOs globally. But in the U.S., CEOs rank uncertainty first. The rest of the CEOs out there were worried about a recession. They also stated that CEOs are still trying to prove AI's business value. They are prioritizing skills and leadership development as AI changes start to work. But they're also having to take a closer look at employee mental health. So let me ask the question, is reinvention really new? It's really not. Let's take a look at history, just briefly. If we go all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, World War I, and there was a big pandemic back then that a lot of people forget about. Millions of lives were lost from the pandemic, not just the war. Depression and World War II came after that. The oil embargo, the long gas lines, I don't know how many of you remember that. The great financial catastrophe that we had in 2008, and then COVID, and now we're in the AI era. So uncertainty and structural change recur, but it's just the form of the change that changes from one era to another. So what does that tell us? When we look at the way uncertainty travels, that we see some differences over time. Today we see instant information, global interdependence, faster narratives, faster everything, including the digital visibility that's constantly bombarding us all the time. Those are the things that are the challenge. And for executives, many of the core demands of leadership are not new, as they were in the past, but they've just intensified today because of the speed of change and the visibility of every response. So I want to switch gears here. I don't want to call this a time of reinvention. I'd actually like to rephrase this whole idea and call it a dynamic environment. That's a little more positive, don't you think? The definition of dynamic, marked by constant change, activity, or development, showing energy and effective action, involving ongoing movement or shifting conditions, a different way of thinking. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to kind of get our minds set into a different way of thinking. So how does a leader operate in a dynamic environment? Let's talk about that. Okay, here's one of my aviation analogies. I learned many principles that apply directly to leadership when I learned how to fly in the Navy. In this era of reinvention, the leadership challenge is very similar to flying an airplane. Aviators are constantly looking for challenges, problems, for things to change. They're looking for the unexpected. They're trying to stay on top of not only flying their aircraft, but they're trying to keep an eye on what's going on around them. We used to have a saying, a successful flight was when landings equaled takeoffs. So let's talk about this a little more. Staying ahead of the airplane was one of the challenges that a young pilot was learning how to do. But it involved preparation, constant scan, risk management, and acting early. In training, when I was up in the air in my student days, the instructor would ask me what I was looking at. He could see that I was drifting up above my altitude or I was drifting off course. He says, "Where are your eyes?" And then every once in a while, he would pull the throttle back. And I'd have a simulated engine failure. And I had to react right away. Nose down, airspeed. And I hope that I had picked out an airfield that I was going to go to that would have been suitable for a real landing should I have had to have landed. Those were the things that you were always being trained to look out for. The mindset of preparation, constantly looking for change, risk management, and acting early has stayed with me ever since. I learned to develop the discipline of staying ahead of the aircraft. So this dynamic workload management, that I would call it, was basically these 4 activities. Preparation included planning, briefing, debriefing, in-flight planning, lessons learned, whatever you needed to make your plans next time even better. Constant scan. You were not only controlling the aircraft, but you were managing cockpit resources. You were communicating with other crew on the aircraft. Constant communication, constant decision making. Here's what we see, here's what we're going to do. Risk management, situational awareness, being aware of what you're doing and where you're going and what kind of things you might have to deal with. And you always had to be evaluating that. Acting early, staying ahead of the aircraft, actually projecting your mind in front of where you were physically and time-wise, thinking ahead. I think this is one of the challenges that CEOs have today, is being able to do this. So what happens for a business leader if they're able to stay ahead? They preserve time, margin, and options. Priorities are more clear. Signals are caught early. Decisions preserve flexibility. Teams absorb change better. Trade-offs are named. And options remain open. You've given yourself more room for when things are going to change again because you know it's going to happen. The opposite, when a leader falls behind, attention narrows, same as it does with a pilot. If they're in the cockpit or behind the aircraft, their attention is not out in front where it needs to be. Same thing with a CEO. The urgent beats important. Decisions become reactive. Small problems grow, teams cope instead of anticipating, and events take control of your actions instead of you controlling the actions you need to take for moving forward. So, a little discipline here in how a leader in an organization, no matter what level they're at, preparation is a big part of it. Clarifying priorities, roles, fallback plans. Scan, tracking internal and external changes to give you feedback on where you're drifting and where you need to make corrections. Anticipating risk, identifying weakening margins, and then acting early. adjusting before issues grow. In an era of reinvention, leaders should seek to preserve time, margin, and options by leading ahead. So how does a leader stay focused? In their PricewaterhouseCoopers CEO survey of 2026, they had surveyed nearly 4,500 CEOs across the globe. And this is what they got back. CEOs are encountering a more complex environment shaped by AI. And the urgent is crowding out reinvention. This problem. The leadership challenge is spending enough time on the future while managing today's demands. So how do we stay focused? 30 years ago, in 1996, former Army Chief of Staff Gordon R. Sullivan and his strategic planner Michael Harper published their book, Hope is Not a Method. Think about that. Hope is not a method. It was a national bestseller. And they talked about how they transformed the Army during a time of great change in our country's history. This is back in the 90s. The book shows how the Army's experience offers practical leadership lessons for business. A lot of people say that, well, the military's military and business is business. But actually, history has shown that if you take a look at it, both sides have traded a lot of ideas with each other over the past 50 years. Sullivan's point is that vision is not abstract. He said that the Army's experience offers practical leadership lessons for business because staying ahead of long-range issues, leading change well, and keeping people productive through transformation are some of the biggest challenges that we have in transformation, reinvention, whatever we want to call it. His point was that vision is not abstract. It starts with the ability to see beyond the constraints of the present. Then, define the future clearly enough that people can understand what success means for their own role. Not just the company, you need to explain to others what success looks like for their role. It lifts the attention above day-to-day issues and turns the future into a guide for action and change. Sullivan described a process where he would imagine he was already in the future and he would be looking back into the past. And it helped him to then work backward to identify policies, strategies, and steps needed to reach the future from the present. This book is still very relevant for today. I spent my own time at the Pentagon, very, very close to those years that Sullivan was there. And we were right-sizing the Navy. We had 10, 15 process action teams scattered across the Pentagon. We were trying to reinvent the Navy. We were trying to put commercial off-the-shelf technology onto ships of war to see if we could save money and manpower. That experiment didn't work very well, but we learned some things out of that. So let me go to my last point here. How do we stay focused? This is something that I learned when I was learning how to hover a helicopter. And I'm going to actually take a chair here and do a little analogy while I'm talking. My flight instructor was probably one of the better ones, at least I thought he was. Every student says that their instructor was the best. But, you know, I went out there and my instructor said, okay, today we're going to learn how to hover the aircraft. You may think it looks easy and the aircraft's going to be steady and everything, but it's absolutely not. And I couldn't believe that. And it's like, okay, this is a steady stream of controlled inputs. You know, a helicopter isn't supposed to fly anyway. It's a million parts flying information, right? So, you know, how do you expect it to stay steady? You got to control it. So he took me out there to this practice pad, and he allowed me to get on the controls with him. So there's 4 controls. There's a lever that's coming out of the back of the aircraft called the collective. That's what helps the aircraft go up and down. And then there's a cyclic stick in the middle here. Makes you go forward, backwards, right, left. Okay, you get the mental idea. And then there's these two pedals in front of you. It's like, I'm feeling like a chimpanzee here. I got to move all four of my limbs and make something happen here. So you move the right pedal, the aircraft yaws to the right. Move the left pedal, it yaws to the left. So he said, okay, get onto the controls with me. I did. And it's like he was just smooth as glass. He said, okay, I want you to just get on the collective with me, and then I'm going to give it to you. He didn't make me do all four at the same time. And he said, okay, you feel how that feels? Going up and down a little bit at a time? Okay, now take your hand off the collective. Let's put it on the cyclic. Okay, let's move it around a little bit. Okay, good. Now the pedals. All right, I'm going to get it steady, and then you're going to take controls. Okay, so he got it steady. I took the controls. It's like, okay, this is my day. I took the controls. I started looking around me and everything. And all of a sudden, a small movement become a large one. And it's like I was looking at the ground through the bubble glass down below, and it's like, I'm all over the place. I'm going up and down, and pretty soon the instructor said, I got it, because he didn't want me to crash this into the ground. And he asked me a very important question, and I'll never forget it. He said, what are you looking at? And I said, I'm looking all around. I'm looking outside in front. I'm looking on the ground here and everything. He started laughing. And he said, okay, here's what I want you to do next. He said, I'm going to give you the controls again, and this time I want you to look only at the horizon. And then use your peripheral vision to see what's going on around you. Okay? So I took the controls again. Steady as she goes. I was looking at a fixed point. The horizon was not moving. And my inputs down here started to become a lot smaller because I had a steady fix on what I was looking at. And that's when I learned how to hover a helicopter. The vision that CEOs have is their horizon. If they're struggling with everything that's going on around them, they need to take their eyes off of all the mess down here and focus on the horizon, on their vision. And then their inputs and changes and adjustments that they make to the things that are going on around them will be smaller, more manageable. They won't overreact. They won't make mistakes. So, I'm going to leave you with that. Lead ahead and stay focused on the vision and bring others with you. Thank you for your time.